We have a cracking panel for this, which is going to be moderated by Carolyn Breeze, today wearing her As You Pay cap. Carolyn is a leader in empowering organisations to drive inclusion and equality through technology and accessibility. She has more than 2 decades of experience in technology, e-commerce and FinTech, has been praised countless times. Of course, she was most recently the FinTech Leader of the Year in 2021 Women in Finance Awards, Executive Leader at As You Pay, Zepto, GoCardless, Braintree, PayPal and eBay. Is there anyone left on the list you'd still like to work at? We'll maybe discuss that a little later. She has brought incredible insight and, of course, success to those businesses. So please put your hands together. Welcome Carolyn to the stage as the moderator for our panel going from startup to global player opportunities and challenges. Joining her is Mark Healy, the CEO of Novarti Group. Mark is an experienced global payments and software executive with a deep expertise in business development, transformation, organic growth, M&A completion and integration across a number of domains in global markets. Recently appointed as the CEO of Novarti, Mark initially joined as the Executive GM of Payments in July 2022. Prior to that, he's had a bunch of C-suite roles at Global Payments, Optimal Payments, Easy Debit, I was going to re-pronounce that in a different way, but eWay, delivering organic and inorganic growth. Please welcome Mark to the stage. Great to have you here. And congrats on the new gig. Piers Cracknell is the General Manager of BC Payments Australia. Piers has more than 20 years. You can see there's a lot of experience on this panel. I think we're going to get over 100 years worth of experience here in banking and fintech, gained at NAB, CBA and Global Fintechs. Banking Circle is a European payments bank supporting global banking and payments for more than 350 banks, fintechs and regulated payment businesses. Please welcome Piers. Come on up. Mark Shaw is the Chief Operating Officer at OFX, an ASX-listed global cross-border payments company. Mark oversees OFX's global operations across 8 countries, ensuring seamless international money transfers for clients worldwide. He joined in 2018, originally as the Chief Risk Officer. That would have been fun. And has more than 20 years' experience in financial services. So where are we now? 90 years. We have 90 years' worth of experience. So, Oriana, it's up to you. Please tell me you've been doing this for at least 10 years. Oriana is the Head of Product Partnerships in Australia and New Zealand at Stripe. She's an experienced payments and fintech specialist with more than a decade. Yes, that's 100 years of experience right here, people. Prior to Stripe, Oriana held roles consulting for global enterprise software platform Zafin and led the product team at Airwallex, where she was responsible for directing Airwallex's global product strategy and proposition during her 11 years at ANZ. Oriana, that's more than 100 years. Oh my gosh.
I think we're a geriatric 120-year-old panel.
Yeah. Oriana's key digital transformation and product expansion programs. Ladies and gentlemen, go wild for this century of experience.
Sometimes I see panels like ours get up and you hear all those brands and all those years and all those scars and the eyes twitching. It'd be just amazing if one day we just started a fintech. What would happen then? Before we kick off, thank you for the introduction, Simon. I was going to let everyone give a little bit about themselves, but I think it's kind of been done. But before we kick off, I just wanted to thank our hosts, Banking Circle, who have a little announcement to make as well. You've got some news to share, Piers?
Yeah, thanks. Is that working? No?
Testing.
Is that working?
No.
All right. Surely this. Oh, here we go. Right. Thanks, Carolyn. Yes, we're delighted to announce the launch of BC Payments Australia this week. So it's really wonderful timing that we can coincide the launch of the Australian arm of the Banking Circle Group with this year's Intersekt, and you touched on it right at the start. So Banking Circle as a European bank plays really nicely into the fintech world. So we are known as the bank for fintech in Europe and work with around 300, 400 fintechs and payments businesses globally. And Australia for us is a really exciting opportunity. We've launched the BC Payments Australia entity. And we see ourselves as an enabler for Australian fintech, firstly for those organisations who are looking to go overseas and are looking for a suitable banking partner that understands fintech, has the right risk appetite and solutions. And Airwallex is a really good example of that because we've been a banking partner of theirs for many years now. Secondly, the Banking Circle Group started life in the era of debanking in Europe, and so 10 years down the track, we understand the playbook, we know how to work with fintechs, and we are taking that playbook, bringing it into Australia, and we can really meet the needs of payments businesses who may have been impacted by debanking.
Nice, thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot there. So yeah, with over 120 years of experience, this is the perfect panel to talk about expanding globally, not just because of the experience of the organisations that are represented here, the individuals themselves, but also the market that we're in at the moment and the fact that we've got commercial, an enabler, an operator and a product expert. So yeah, we'll jump straight in. Obviously, expanding internationally for Australian fintechs has always been a huge opportunity. Bigger markets, more established markets, very similar consumer behaviour, and we do kind of punch above our weight when it comes to fintech. But over the last 3 years, particularly with COVID, we've seen some changes in the appetite, what's inspiring people to go overseas. I'll start off with you, Oriana. What have you seen in your role?
Yeah, I think anticipated international demand is definitely the top reason that businesses look to sell their products and services into international markets. We recently released a report at Stripe on digital trade, and so we know from that report that businesses are increasingly looking at expanding internationally, not only to chase the anticipated international demand, but also because they're following existing customers offshore. And it's also to chase long-term prospects. So for many Australian businesses, international expansion is just a key part of their competitive strategy. And I think definitely internet-based tooling is helping that journey. We've certainly seen across the 30,000 Australian businesses that we help today to expand internationally, digital tools have enabled them to do that quickly, which is important because there's actually a correlation between expanding quickly into international markets and a business's economic success. So we've actually seen globally, those that expand within their first year of operation typically see better revenue, so 141 percentage points higher than their counterparts that take longer to expand. So yeah, definitely some good reasons to look at international expansion, anticipated international demand, key part of your company's strategy, and also that enabler of digital tooling.
Thanks, Oriana. Mark, with your operational hat on, what are some of the, I mean, we've all got scars. I'm sure we could share all our examples and stories of what went wrong and what went right with international expansion, but with your operational hat on, what are some of the foundations that need to be in place to ensure, a smooth transition?
Yeah, so look, I think we always talk about context is worth, 100 IQ points, right? So when you're operating in another country, having that understanding of the local context is incredibly important. So, I think the first point is actually making sure that you've got the right people on the ground. I think it's very hard to kind of understand a market and understand the requirements of the market if you are just trying to do this from here. So getting the right people on the ground early and listening to them, finding the right advice, all of those sorts of things I think is incredibly important. Part of that's also then how do you think about, even the governance of your organisation, right? Because in financial services, there's already a fair bit of complexity in terms of actually what you need to do, all the regulatory pieces and so forth. Once you're in another market, in another regulatory environment, the complexity just sort of starts to kind of exponentially grow. So the ability for the sort of company to be able to, or for your business to be able to understand that complexity and manage it is really important, because it's the easiest thing to go wrong, right? You think that the way that you operate in country A is fine operating in country B, and country B has a completely different view of how that works, and that's the quickest thing that goes wrong for you. And I think the third thing is just thinking around how your operating model is going to work, right? Because once you have that local, another place where you're trying to manage that, is how do you balance the priorities, the investment, the trade-offs between what is required for that business where it's operating in that country and what's happening at your sort of headquarters, right? So we have in our sort of in the OFX world, there was a period of time where we were trying to grow in the US. We didn't really have. We had sort of salespeople in the US. We had sort of some operational people in the US, but we didn't really have a leadership sort of team in the US. And so, things are merrily going on. The technology teams are all here. The product teams are all here, building out, customer journeys, thinking like how Australians operate the platform. And it wasn't until we really invested in putting the right people on the ground in the US that there was a much better understanding about, that's just not going to work. The US payment system is incredibly different. The way US consumers operate is incredibly different. And actually then starting to fight for the right investment to go there, and actually being able to create those business cases, the understanding to say, well, if you give me this, I will be able to generate that. And that makes a big difference to kind of how you operate. Otherwise, you risk that you've just got someone continually asking for something, and it just like, what do you really need that? We really focused on all our investment here. So if you're going to do it, you need to make sure you've got the right people, listen to them, and then give them the right investment to succeed.
That's a really important point around how to structure it. And I've been on the receiving end of that a couple of times, having been first boots on the ground for a couple of brands in Australia who had led out of the UK and the US. So Australia's pretty much a rounding error in that environment. And the actual operational structure of the business. So whether there's a lead at headquarters who is responsible for international expansion, have their own P&L, their own structure within that. So you're making decisions, competing with Spain and Canada versus competing with headquarters, I think is a big one. And then just to your point as well, there's a lot in servicing a local environment that's different. And so I know when people expand into Australia, understanding that they want to hear Australians, they want to have that service element here and be more managed end to end, I think has been a challenge. And so on the counter side of that, Piers, we spoke when we caught up to plan for the panel around your experience with understanding what those first hires should look like. So yeah, there's the putting a country manager in place first, but what are some of the other key hires?
Yeah, I was at a dinner last night and we were just talking about this point, so I'm not going to steal this analogy, I will use it, but somebody said you need a Swiss Army knife for your first hire, and I think the first hire on ground does need to be a country manager. It's about that person having the network, which is really, really important. So from a Swiss Army knife kind of analogy, they are doing so many things, wearing many hats. They could be setting up the entity, working on the licensing, the regulatory, the suppliers, the auditors, and finding an office, and then doing the business development as well. And I think if you took let's say a salesperson from the overseas mothership and just sent them overseas and put them in a WeWork office, that's not going to work. And the country manager will then build that next layer down. I think the other piece is, well, it's not for everyone. If you're the first boots on the ground and you're working for an overseas business, it's really hard at times, particularly when the time zone is different. London, could be 9, 10, 12 hours time difference, right? And so your working day could start at 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, I've been in banking a long time, and I used to be an early bird. I was in at 7:30 in the morning, and that doesn't work anymore because I'm working at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and you have to really think about that from a work-life balance. It's sometimes a work-life integration, a bit of a balancing trick at times as well, so, yeah.
I'll throw down to you, Mark. I'd love to understand your perspective around how an Australian fintech should develop that market strategy, like what should be involved in that thinking before they even consider boots on the ground?
That's a small question, isn't it? It won't take me long. Look, I think the key ingredients for success are really understanding the local market conditions and the local market structure. That's really going to be key to success. It's going to take you longer and cost you more than you would have thought, and so access to capital is obviously a very important part of that triangle. And I think also the agility in your business model. Things are going to go to plan and also off plan, so your ability to be nimble and adapt and flexible in your business model and adjust to that as you kind of navigate that course are core. And so when I think about these kind of decisions, it really comes back to the why, the where, and the how, right? If you're not setting up with a global view immediately as you start the business. So why are we doing it? So are we following a customer, or are you opening a channel? Do we believe there's a good product market fit? It's really got to link back to that decision as to your business strategy. The where is the adaptation to the market conditions and that market expansion opportunity, and how proximate that is to your core market. And the how, are you going to buy, build, or partner? And I sat through the last couple of presentations. I loved what Marnie Baker said around partnerships and that context of a professional partnership being very much like a personal partnership. And so that to me was a really great analogy, because things will not go to plan. And so you've got to be absolutely prepared to go on that journey. And for me, in my own personal experience, we all get excited about the market size and the smell of the deal and the opportunity and the growth and the revenue opportunity. But in my personal experience, when it boils down to a partnership and what's going to make that partnership a success, it comes down to really two things. One is the concept of what I call equivalence. And so actually, when you're structuring this arrangement, this partnership, as Marnie said, it's got to have equal value for both parties. If it doesn't have equal value for both parties, and that doesn't necessarily need to be commercial, but equal value for both parties, then it's actually not going to be strategic and it's not going to be a partnership. And the second one is some alignment around vision of what you're trying to do and culture. And so when you get set up, things will go to plan, things won't go to plan. And so when you have to change course, adapt, make a decision, work with and through that partnership, if you don't have some degree of consistency and alignment around what you're trying to do, and some degree of consistency and alignment around how you're going to work through those challenges, then it's not really a true partnership, right? It's just some sort of a relationship. And so those two things really, for me, they must be there to form the basis of a successful mid to long-term partnership once it's off the ground.
Partnerships is a really interesting one, because I think partnerships mean different things to different companies. And I think in the context of expanding into an international market, it could mean a go-to-market partner. It could mean an enablement partner like a banking circle or Stripe. It could also mean, becoming an integrated partner into somebody that's already addressing the same market over there. And we've seen some very creative ways to enter markets, particularly since COVID. So partnerships has been quite strong. The other has been acquiring distressed or stressed assets that already have the foundations of what you're going to be building or trying to build in market. So, and I think events like this are great because everybody comes together. It's like a big reunion, but it's actually networking that drives a lot of that decision making, or at least that information gathering around how to enter that market. I'd love some feedback on what you've seen with networking and partnerships and expansion. And I know, Piers, you had some insights into the networking component.
So I'll share an insight. I think when I first started on day one, I said to my management team, I said, show me all the analysis you've done in the Australian market, just so I don't spin the wheels. And they said, we've done nothing. But it was very much client-led, right? So luckily there were European clients who had an Australian arm, so it was a great opportunity for me to go and to speak to those local entities to get that local market kind of feedback and what were the pain points and so on. But the most important thing that I did, people thought of me as a banker and not necessarily a fintech person. And so I had to throw myself into every single fintech event. Come here. I went to every single kind of meetup, startup event that you can go to, and just started talking to people. And what I found was that the Australian fintech community are incredibly giving of the time. Very happy to open up the network and introduce you to people if you are genuine, you're sincere, and you can actually solve some of their pain points. So networking for me has been incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, I think we were doing some networking together yesterday, weren't we, over downstairs? But for me, that's about market intelligence and insight and research, right? So depending on what stage you're at, it's, I mentioned before, we all get kind of sidelined and focused on market size, but what is the market structure? How does the market actually work? What are the industry behaviours? How are competitors positioned? What is the level of government intervention or potential intervention in the market? What are the cultural norms? How aligned will your brand be to that marketplace? What are the behaviours of the customer in that market? What does the national technology infrastructure look like? I mean, are we talking about a first-tier sort of market or a country like Libya or Chad, for example, right? So all these kind of things help you build a picture through network to give you really clear insight around the market, its structure and how it operates.
I heard there was a lot of those conversations happening at karaoke last night at about 1:30 in the morning. I'm sure they were really healthy conversations. Matt?
I was going to say on the partnership space, I think, and the acquisition space. So, we recently acquired Patron, who I think a lot of people might know, Francois and Yaku. And what's really behind that deal was that, they've built this great platform in Australia that we really want to, work with our corporate customers on. But actually, the real value is actually being able to take that globally and give them access to our licenses, our infrastructure, and all those in those spaces. And having, that sort of partnership where you've got guys who have really built something, great, and bring that energy into a company which, is 25 years old, started as a fintech, but is now a 25-year-old company, but can bring also, the people, that local context. They're talking to our guys on the ground in the US, in London, in Europe, and going, oh, great, like all these opportunities we can go after now. That's really powerful, and I think that's the real opportunity in terms of that happened from the fact that we is through those sort of networks, connections, looking at companies that were doing interesting things and just having those meetings to go, actually, this is something that can work.
That's a perfect example, actually. And after you've done your own global expansion and you're making acquisitions like that, you're really doing it with a global first hat on, aren't you? Because if they're not scalable and they're not going to benefit the other markets, then it's kind of a bit of a shame to acquire something that's not going to expand with you. So, Oriana, Stripe and obviously with your background in particular have enabled many companies to expand overseas and have been the tool to be able to do that. What have you seen go wrong?
I think, probably speaking more from personal experience, product market fit can look really different from one market to the next. So just picking up on what Mark was saying about the value of networking and understanding those market nuances, I think it's really important to be intentional about understanding the ecosystem in the market that you're entering and being really intentional about connecting with clients or potential clients because you need to figure out how you're going to win quickly. And also not being constrained by your existing frame of reference. We are certainly having some really robust discussions internally, just to give you an example, about the different stages of real-time payments across different markets. So just because you've done something in one market doesn't necessarily it's going to resonate in another, and vice versa. If you haven't done something in one market yet, you might not be able to recognise the opportunity in a different market if you don't consciously try to disconnect from your existing frame of reference. I think the other challenge could be, particularly if you work with a client across multiple markets, is achieving consistency. So that's something you want to sort of keep front of mind as well. The user experience, if they're going to be doing business with you in multiple markets, having some level of consistency across that product or service that you offer them.
Thank you, it's a good point. Mark, you wanted me to ask you, so I'm intrigued, as in Mark Shaw, sorry. We call each other Mark OFX and Mark Navati, but it's probably not appropriate to do that on the panel. Mark OFX, some examples of interesting strategies you've seen with companies expanding overseas. You wanted to talk about some specific examples you've seen work really well.
That worked well or didn't work well?
Oh, actually, probably both.
Yeah,
The ones that don't work well are usually the biggest learnings, right?
There's lots of learnings. I think I sort of touched on it before. One is around that regulatory piece. You just can't underestimate the effort and the stuff required sometimes to get licenses in countries now. And I think, like we had a good example around, post-Brexit, everybody was looking for European licenses, and you go to Ireland and everybody thought Ireland, like they had thousands of people apply. And just before Brexit, I think they'd only issued 8 licenses. We got our license in December before that January piece. And this was, we have all this experience and things, and we still had to work through, all of these processes and understand that actually what the Central Bank of Ireland is looking for is not the same as what other regulators were looking for. And, it wasn't until we actually got the right people on the ground in Ireland who understood the regulator and understood what was sort of required that we really started to make good progress on that. And I think people underestimate sometimes sort of that regulatory piece, and actually to get licenses now is a lot more difficult. And I think the things that you've got to kind of think about, right, are in financial services is most of these regulators are now much more focused on prudential soundness of sort of fintechs than they used to be. It used to be, maybe a little bit of AML, maybe there was a whole bunch of stuff, but there's so many clients in fintechs now that actually the regulators are a lot more concerned, particularly in places like the UK and so forth, are a lot more concerned about solvency of places. They're worried about people falling over and that clients will lose money, all of these sorts of things. So you need to be kind of prepared for the fact that you'll actually have to have some more of that, prudential type of regulation and understanding of your business to do that well. And the second piece is just not understanding the differences in those local markets. So I sort of touched on the US before, but one of the big differences in the US, that we see for our kind of business, right, is that unlike in a place like Australia, the UK, where you can just push money very easily to someone, in the US, you just can't do that, particularly at higher values. So everything is, direct debit, pull. And then when you do direct debit pull in the US, there's a whole bunch of stuff where, people can just dishonour those transactions 30 days later. And if you don't understand those things and build the right controls in, you're going to lose a lot of money really quickly. And we've seen, examples where, people come into these markets and sort of say, oh, we can do all this stuff, and we're looking and going, I don't know how they're doing that. And sure enough, in a period of months, that they're not doing it anymore. So I think, again, having that understanding of, the way that the business works in the way that you're doing things now might have to change and might have to understand the local conditions is really important.
Thank you. I'd love to just go through us all as a wrap-up with your one takeaway for everybody. We'll start with you.
I think it's not set and forget. So the landscape and customer preferences and regulation is constantly evolving. And so you really need to continue your investment when you enter a new market to make sure you're remaining compliant and maintaining product market fit. And I think utilising global infrastructure like Stripe to help you manage those ongoing complexities is a really viable route to do that.
I think it's the one thing is you need to have that real balance around that local versus global piece. Don't underestimate the need to have the people on the ground, and don't just take that at face value. It has to be a global once you're global, you have to have a global operating model that works. You can't just run it from here.
I'd say give it a go. If you don't do it, you'll never know. But do it in a phased and measured approach. I mean, you just don't wake up in the morning and think, hey, I'm going to set up an office in London or I'm going to set up an office in Sydney, because at the end of the day, it's a balance sheet exercise, right? And you're taking resources and priorities from other areas of the business. So there are considerations around that, but give it a go.
I'll piggyback off Piers and say, sure, do that, but understand the why. Make sure you're very clear on why you're doing it, and you have very clear definitions of what success looks like.
Thank you. Thanks for today. A round of applause for our panellists.